In the year 1763, in a quiet English village, an old man vanished into thin air while sitting in a chair in broad daylight, surrounded by witnesses. And to this day, nobody on this planet can explain how it happened. No footprints, no screams, no struggle, just an empty chair, a folded coat, and a mystery so strange that even investigators who reopened the case 170 years later walked away with nothing. If you think you have heard every disappearance story on the internet, I promise you have not heard this one, because almost no one has ever told it. Stay till the end, because the ending of this story will genuinely give you chills. Let's go back to the small town of Shepton Mallet, tucked away in the county of Somerset, England. This was a place of quiet cottages, farmland, and slow, uneventful evenings. The kind of place where nothing ever happened, where every face was familiar and every rumor traveled from door to door within hours. In one of these cottages lived a woman named Susanna, an elderly widow living with her much younger brother, Owen Parfitt. Owen had not always been the frail man he was now. In his youth, he had lived a wild and reckless life, the kind of life that people whispered about long after he had grown old and weak. Stories floated around the village that he had once been a soldier, a smuggler, even a pirate in his younger days, sailing across the West Indies, India, and Africa, caught up in things far darker than village gossip could fully capture. Some said he had once been involved in a scandal with his own young cousin. Others said he had blood on his hands from his years abroad. Whatever the truth was, one thing was certain: Owen Parfitt was not a man people considered innocent. But time is cruel to even the boldest men. By the time Owen returned home to Shepton Mallet, he was no longer the dangerous adventurer people once feared. A massive stroke had left him almost completely paralyzed. He could not walk. He could barely move his arms. He spent his days lying in bed or being carried outside so he could feel the sun on his face, completely dependent on his sister and a kind neighbor for every single need. The once feared pirate and soldier had been reduced to a frail old man in a nightshirt, unable to even lift himself out of a chair. Imagine that contrast for a moment. A man who once may have taken lives, who once sailed across oceans chasing fortune and danger, now could not even stand up on his own. And it was this exact helplessness that makes what happened next so utterly impossible to explain. On a warm June evening, Owen asked to be brought outside one more time, just like he did on so many other evenings. His sister and a neighbor carefully lifted him from his bed, carried him to the front porch, and placed him gently into his usual wooden chair, propping him up on his folded greatcoat so he could sit comfortably. Across the narrow road, in plain view, a group of farm workers were finishing their labor for the day, well within earshot of the house. This detail matters more than you think, because it means Owen was never truly alone. There were living, breathing witnesses just a few dozen yards away the entire time. After settling him outside, Susanna went back into the house to attend to some chores. She expected to return in a few minutes to bring her brother back inside, as she always did. But dark clouds were rolling in that evening, and a storm was approaching fast. Worried about the sudden change in weather, she quickly finished what she was doing and hurried back outside to bring Owen in before the rain hit. And that is when everything stopped making sense. Owen Parfitt was gone. Not moved, not fallen, not dragged, gone. His folded coat sat exactly where it had been placed, untouched, right there on the chair. There was no blood, no signs of a struggle, no drag marks in the dirt, nothing knocked over, nothing disturbed. Susanna panicked and immediately called out to the neighbor and to the farm workers across the road, the very same men who had been working in that field the entire time. Every single one of them said the exact same thing. Nobody saw anyone approach the house. Nobody saw anyone leave with him. Nobody heard a scream, a cry for help, or even the sound of a struggle. A man who could not stand on his own two legs had simply vanished from a chair in full view of a village, and not a single living soul could explain how. Word spread through Shepton Mallet almost instantly, and a search began right away. Neighbors combed through nearby fields, checked wells, searched hedgerows, and asked anyone who might have passed by that evening if they had seen anything unusual. Men carried lanterns into the growing darkness, calling out his name into the wind, half expecting to hear a faint reply from somewhere in the fields. But there was nothing, Not a single clue, not a torn piece of clothing, not a footprint in the soft summer soil, absolutely nothing. The storm that had been approaching that evening eventually broke, drenching the fields and washing away whatever faint traces might have remained, as if nature itself had decided to erase any hope of an answer. As days turned into weeks, the search quietly faded, but the questions never did. How does a paralyzed man disappear from a chair, in broad daylight, with witnesses within shouting distance, without leaving behind a single trace? To this day, this remains one of the most confounding vanishing acts in recorded English history, precisely because it defies every logical explanation you could possibly offer. There was no ransom demand. No enemy ever confessed. No body ever properly surfaced. Just silence stretching across centuries. As the years passed, theories multiplied like wildfire throughout the village. The most popular belief among the townsfolk at the time was chillingly simple. The devil himself had come to collect Owen Parfitt, as payment for the sins of his wild and violent youth. In a deeply religious 18th century society, this explanation felt oddly satisfying to people trying to make sense of the impossible. Preachers reportedly used his story as a warning to the youth of the village, telling them that a life of sin would eventually catch up with them, no matter how many years passed. Others whispered that his dark past as a smuggler or pirate had finally caught up to him, that old enemies had somehow silently taken him away without anyone noticing, perhaps paying off witnesses or acting with terrifying precision. But this theory has a massive hole in it. Owen could not walk. He would have needed to be carried away by force, and yet nobody working right across the road heard even a hint of a disturbance. A struggle involving a fully grown man being lifted and removed against his will should have made noise. It should have drawn attention. And yet the field full of workers noticed absolutely nothing out of the ordinary. A more grounded theory suggests that perhaps Owen, despite his condition, had somehow regained just enough strength in a moment of adrenaline or delirium to crawl away and collapse somewhere unseen, perhaps into a ditch, a pond, or dense undergrowth nearby, where his body simply decomposed before anyone thought to search that specific spot. It is not impossible for stroke patients to regain partial movement unexpectedly, and fear or panic can sometimes push the body beyond its known limits. But even this theory struggles to explain why an extensive search of the surrounding area, conducted by people who knew the land intimately, turned up absolutely nothing, not even decades later when the ground was dug up and examined again. For decades, the story of Owen Parfitt slowly became local legend, told and retold by candlelight, until 1813, exactly 50 years later, when something happened that reignited the entire mystery. Workers doing renovations near the very same property where Owen had vanished struck something solid while digging. It was a human skeleton, buried in what appeared to be a hastily covered cavity in an old garden wall. For a brief moment, the entire village believed the impossible had finally been solved. Owen Parfitt's remains had been found at last, and the 50-year-old nightmare could finally be laid to rest. Except it could not. Medical examiners at the time carefully studied the skeletal remains, and their conclusions sent a fresh wave of confusion through the town. The bones did not belong to an elderly, disabled man at all. They belonged to a young woman. Whoever this person was, she had absolutely nothing to do with Owen Parfitt's disappearance, and just like that, the one lead everyone had been hoping for collapsed completely, leaving the original mystery just as unsolved as the day it began. You would think that after such a dead end, the case would finally be forgotten. But Owen Parfitt refused to stay buried in obscurity. In 1814, a local lawyer named William Maskell took it upon himself to formally investigate the disappearance, tracking down anyone still alive who remembered that fateful evening and recording their testimonies. What he discovered was almost as strange as the disappearance itself. Witnesses contradicted each other on nearly every detail. Some claimed the sister was gone for only a minute or two. Others insisted it had been much longer. Some believed there had been a stranger seen near the house earlier that day, while others swore nobody unfamiliar had come anywhere near Shepton Mallet that entire week. The truth had become so tangled in 50 years of retelling that piecing together the actual sequence of events was nearly impossible. And then, almost as if the mystery simply refused to die quietly, the story resurfaced one final time in 1933. During major construction and land development in the area surrounding Owen's old home, investigators once again searched the grounds, hoping that modern techniques and fresh eyes might finally uncover what generations before them had missed. They dug through the same soil, examined the same foundations, and searched every inch of the surrounding property. The result was exactly the same as it had always been. Nothing. No bones. No belongings. No trace whatsoever of what had happened to Owen Parfitt on that summer evening in 1763. So here we are, over 260 years later, and the disappearance of Owen Parfitt remains completely, entirely, maddeningly unsolved. A man who could not walk vanished from a chair in broad daylight, surrounded by witnesses close enough to hear a whisper, and left behind absolutely nothing except a folded coat and a question that has outlived every single person who was there that evening. No body has ever been found. No confession has ever surfaced. No logical explanation has ever satisfied historians, investigators, or the people of Shepton Mallet, who still speak of Owen's name in hushed tones to this very day. What do you think really happened to him that summer evening? Was it something rooted in his violent past finally catching up to him in a way no one could explain? Was it simply a case lost to poor record-keeping and unreliable memories over centuries? Or was there something far stranger at play, something that still cannot be explained by science, logic, or reason even after 2.5 centuries? Write your theory in the comments below, because I genuinely want to know what you think happened to Owen Parfitt. And if this story kept you hooked till the very last second, make sure you subscribe, because there are even stranger, even more forgotten stories from history waiting to be told, and you will not want to miss a single one of them.